Good afternoon, good morning, or wherever you're joining us from around the world. My name is Danny Doueri. I am the director of the Center for the Study of the Muslim and Arab World at Cal State University, San Bernardino. Just a land acknowledgement, I wanted to mention that the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab World here at Cal State University, San Bernardino, sits on the unceded territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. Yuha'a Viatan. Similarly, we acknowledge that this program is also co-sponsored by the California Faculty Association's Palestine, Arab, and Muslim Caucus, that's known as the PAM Caucus, which has members in 23 CSU campuses who also live and benefit from several indigenous populations' land that has been unceded in the state of California. We all recognize that we have benefited and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. We affirm our responsibility to respect and amplify indigenous voices and to promote greater awareness of tribal sovereignty. We recognize the importance of initiatives to repatriate cultural property and land and commit to supporting those efforts to the best of our ability. Today, October 9th, marks more than 3 months. We're now into the 4th month of the attack on the Palestinian people, the attack on Gaza. Some people recognize or think that this conflict started on October 7th, which is, of course, at least an insult to history. This conflict started more than 75 years. Some people will argue more than 150 years, actually, with all the colonial and imperialistic powers to go and occupy this very important land. Today, more than 100 or nearly 100 years since the recent conflict or the escalation of the conflict started on October 7th, we've seen some tremendous amount of casualties. Today, as of today, which is January 9th, we have over 23,000 Palestinians who have been killed. Almost 10 of them are children, nearly 7 of them are women. In the injured part, we have a little bit over 60,000 people have been injured, mostly children and women. And this, in addition to the 23,000 people who have been killed, we have almost 8,000 people who are under the rubbles from the Israeli destruction, from the Israeli army's destruction, who have not been accounted for. So the total amount of casualty will be a little bit over 31,000 as of today. And sadly, these numbers could also be expected to go even higher. Today, we're joined by great experts, Mr. John Caravello, who is a professor, and I'll introduce him, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about our other guests today. So Professor Caravello is a lecturer at CSU, our sister campus, CSU in Channel Island, in philosophy. He graduated with a doctorate degree in philosophy from UC Santa Barbara in 2018 with a specialization in epistemological problems of circularity. John is a regular organizer with the Ventura Tenants Union and regularly works in solidarity with organizations like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Brown Berets, and MMIWG. Most recently, John has been working on a book titled Anti-Critical Thinking and leading his campus strike team for their upcoming strike starting on January 22nd. We're also joined by the movie director that we're going to watch today, the Gaza Fight for Freedom, by renowned director and producer and host and activist, Abby Martin. Abby Martin is also the creator and host of the very famous Empire Files. The structure of today's film is going to be, we're going to watch the film, then we're going to open it for Q&A. And we look forward to everybody who's participating today to be with us, to join us for the struggle for freedom, for justice, not only for the Palestinian people, but for all of those who are oppressed around the world. So without further ado and further delay, could we please start the film? leave it to John to introduce Abby again and thank Abby for this amazing, courageous, heartfelt, humanitarian, every positive things inspiring film that you've done. Abby, thank you so much for being here with us today. All hats are to you, and all prayers and well wishes are for our Palestinians and every person who's oppressed today around the world. John, I'll leave it up to you because I know you're handling the Q&A, and I know we have a lot of questions so far.
For sure, for sure. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Abby, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us for the screening of this very important film. We will now take questions, as Danny said. For those of you who joined us a little bit late, Abby is the creator of this film and the creator and host of the Empire Files. Abby, I'll start with a pretty simple one here. How did this film come together, and could you contextualize that it's coming together with what's going on right now in Gaza and in Greater Palestine?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for watching the film, and thank you for putting this screening together. It's never been more urgent to, support documentaries like this and learn the true context and history of what's happening. The film came together because I was in the occupied West Bank back in 2017, and I tried to get into Gaza. I had been in contact with many journalists there already, and I was banned from the Israeli government. I was deemed a propagandist and an Iranian agent, oddly enough. And so I was banned for life from entering Gaza, which was absolutely devastating because that meant that I could never see my friends who had been confined there their whole lives. When the Great March of Return sparked off years later, I was so horrified by the Western media coverage of what was going on because it was so clear cut. In previous conflicts or the onslaughts in Gaza, there's always this plausible deniability from the Israeli authorities saying, oh, we're just trying to get Hamas, so Hamas is using people as human shields. And this was so clear cut, the methodical assassination of civilians that had nothing to do with Hamas, that had nothing to do with this human shield rhetoric, and they were just being picked off one by one methodically over the course of several weeks. And even on that one day where 60 were killed in one of the most egregious massacres ever. So I was so taken aback by the coverage because I thought certainly if people just saw this, then things would change. And so I just reached out to my friends in Gaza, and we just decided let's tell this story in a way that it needs to be told. And so I worked with the Council of International Relations, several journalists on the ground who went, and what's so amazing about this film is that even though I directed the interviews, they went and depicted what they wanted Western audiences to see from Palestinian lens. And I don't think that that's a common practice, especially with filmmaking, in the Western world, is that they try to, it's the both sidesing, it's the overcomplicated narrative where you're trying to, tell two stories when really this is a very clear-cut case of colonized and colonizer and oppressed and oppressor. And so the Palestinian being able to dictate their own reality through their video cameras, and then me just taking their footage and cutting it down and making the film, I think it's such an indictment. It's an incontrovertible proof of Israeli war crimes that I hope can bolster the case at the ICJ that South Africa is bringing. And it's just a heroic ensemble of showing just raw Palestinian resistance and resilience in the face of just sheer brutality and horror. And so I'm just really excited that it's had new legs, and I'm just really hopeful that at the end of this film, it said the only way that Israel will be held responsible, is to be brought before international courts. And so even though there's this horrific genocidal onslaught going on, and it's the most devastating thing I've ever seen in my life, there is a glimmer of hope that something is going to happen finally, and that this criminal apartheid state will finally be held accountable for its actions.
Thank you. All right, I'll move on to one from the chat here. It's in two parts. It's a bit long, so just stick with me. A common refrain of people here in the USA, the center of imperialism, in the belly of the beast, is one dripping in apathy, hopelessness, and cynicism. that thinking about, for instance, the history of occupied Palestine and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, it takes too much energy, that there's basically nothing we can do, and that whatever we try will ultimately be stamped out by the ruling class. So could you say a bit about how viewers might avoid that apathy and defeatism, cynicism, and other self-undermining modes of thinking, and instead build an optimistic mindset that can support us in our movement towards justice and liberation for all?
Yeah, and I think that just looking at the tide that has swelled, I mean, look at the global movement that has emerged. It's horrifying and tragic that this egregious massacre that's continuing has been the impetus for this global awakening. But regardless, we are seeing it, and there is no turning back. I was already hopeful at the fact that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, these are traditionally kind of like liberal organizations that have been very sidestepping this issue for decades, even though it's been very clear cut. And for them to come on board and finally call Israel for what it is a couple of years ago already, I think, cemented Israel in stone as an apartheid state. And once you are labeled that from the premier human rights organizations in the world, there's no turning back on that. So now it's what has to be done to make apartheid fall. So there already was a grievous crime against humanity being committed that was internationally being recognized by human rights organizations. Unfortunately, the propaganda that's peddled and used to placate American audiences works in droves, even though it's very cartoonish and crazy. I mean, calling every civilian a militant and they're a human shield. And I mean, it's absolutely insane what has worked for so long. But really, if you look at generational breakdowns of age categories, Gen Z, Gen X, and even a lot of millennials, they are completely broken from that propaganda apparatus. They no longer buy into corporate media. They are watching Palestinians dictate their own realities through social media and all of these things unfolding real time. And so we are essentially just being live streamed the genocide, which is very dystopian. But it also is very helpful in believing our own eyes without having to be dictated by corporate media and Western pundits and politicians telling us, no, don't believe your lying eyes. This is not what's happening. So I think what we're seeing in the world today is unprecedented. It's monumental. There is no turning back. If you were to ask me when this film came out, I would have had a different answer, but I am so hopeful right now, which is hard to say because Gaza is uninhabitable. I think that we can all see that Gaza's been completely wiped out. But I do think that people's power is the only thing that can change the system. And we are seeing that in droves. I mean, everywhere around the world, millions of people shutting business down as usual, no business as usual while genocide is happening, shutting down Biden wherever he goes. It is amazing to see it. So I don't think that cynicism and apathy applies at this moment. This is a historical moment. We are finally bringing Israel in front of the Hague. And this is the moment that the world has been waiting for so long. And so depending on what happens in a week or in a couple of days, actually in 2 days, is when the first court proceedings happen. I think that it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens. And I have a lot of faith and hope. And I think that even if the US empire wins out and succeeds at stemming this case and somehow, God knows what's happening behind the scenes, because one of the judges is a State Department official, an ex-State Department official, and we know that the US has been going around blackmailing and threatening countries to not sign on to this. No matter what happens, this is a turning point in the sand that there's no going back from. And so the world has seen Israel for what it is. The mask has been ripped off entirely, and they are seen as the genocidal colonial force that they are. And there's no more pink washing of this. So moving forward, you have to be an unabashed racist if you are going to support this colonial project, I think.
Well put. Yes. Okay, let's see one from the questions here.
You know what? I just saw this question that I didn't address about what happened to the people in the film. Can I quickly?
Yes, yeah, that was the one I was going to ask. Go.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want to ask it?
No. Sure. Yeah, I'll just do it for viewers.
Okay.
What is happening now is 1,000 times worse than what's happened during the Great March of Return. Abby, do you know where those people are? Have they survived? Have their families survived? What happened to these places and faces?
Yes, so this is, and I'm gonna try not to cry because I'm in contact with, I'm already crying. I'm in contact with my friends who made the film every day. It's been really, really hard. And I'll start with Ahmed Ortema, who's the organizer of the Great March. His house was targeted and bombed because we know that Israel is using the cover of this war to basically target all political dissidents. And they know, I mean, we learned from 972 Mag that that was called the assassination factory in Gaza. And we know through Israeli intelligence that they know everyone who's in every building and they make that call. There's a 3-year-old child, they know that's who they're going to kill. So we know that they're targeting these people. And they bombed Ahmed, and he lost 5 family members, including his 10-year-old son was killed in the bombing. And he is suffering with his other 2 children in the hospital. I don't even know what hospital. I don't know how he's in any hospital in Gaza that has generators that are working, but he has 2nd-degree burns covering his whole body, and he's unable to move. That's him. And he told me, he just said, you just have to keep protesting. And there's, I just was like, what can we do? What can we do? He's like, you just have to keep protesting. My other friend, the coordinator and field producer for the entire film, Kareem, he has been displaced twice. His home and his parents' home has been obliterated by bombing, and he is living under a tent, not able to eat. Every morsel of food that he comes across, he's just giving to his children. His wife is pregnant, but he found out on October 10th that she was pregnant. And I have no idea how she's surviving with no water and no hydration for her growing child. And he is just, I mean, he's suffering. I want to try to do a fundraiser to help get them out, but they have nowhere to go. It's asking people to leave and go where? And it's so expensive to do that, even if you did know people outside of Gaza. And then Mazmwaza, the incredibly talented, heroic videographer that was dodging bullets for weeks to get this footage, his 2 brothers have been murdered by bombing. He was afraid to go retrieve their bodies in the north because of the snipers, and they finally were able to retrieve them under the rubble and have a proper burial for his brothers. And he sent me footage of the rubble that his home once was. And he just said in a scream, all of my dreams for my children are gone. What do I do? I mean, there was not even a shred left from that house, not a morsel of clothing. And this is winter. We know that the rain is there. We see flooding, them carrying bodies shrouded in blankets wading through flooded streets. I mean, humanity is dead. Anyone who's looking at what's coming out of Gaza today and is not moved, I don't believe you are a human being. And that's just 3 stories. And there's millions more, and everyone's impacted, and everyone's lost someone or something. And every day I wake up to the horrors that took place the night before, and it's just never ending. And I do not understand how the world has let this happen.
Thank you for sharing that. Can only imagine how difficult. But I want to prop up that we have to keep protesting, right? We have to keep this momentum. There's no stopping. So I see one in the chat here, and take your time, Abby, if need be. How did you first get involved with Palestine, especially with Gaza?
It's always been like part and parcel with just studies of the American empire. I remember, I was radicalized with 9/11 and the Iraq War, and I'll never forget Israeli cabinet ministers and the Israeli prime minister on the day of 9/11 on C-SPAN just saying, now you are going to experience our war on terror. And it was always kind of like coupled together, if I remember correctly, especially being shown footage of Palestinians allegedly dancing in the streets celebrating 9/11. And they initially blamed the attacks on Palestinians. And that was cemented. Just like the 40 beheaded babies and all of these myths, I mean, once a myth takes root and spreads around the world, it's very hard to go back on it. I still meet people today that say, Palestinians and 9/11 in the same sentence as if they're somehow linked. So it was always in the back of my mind that this was an extremely messed up situation. But I think the propaganda and how insidious and and complacent the Western media was in propagating these myths and propagating this kind of situation was during the Flotilla massacre. That's when I really like woke up to how egregious all media was. I remember on CNN seeing the Flotilla massacre footage that the IDF essentially just gave to major news networks, and they were just playing the IDF propaganda clip with no questioning at all. And if for people who don't know what the Flotilla massacre is, you know, every year, a couple times a year, there's aid convoys that go bring like wheelchairs and things like that to Gaza. And there was a flotilla in 2010 full of humanitarian workers that were bringing aid in international waters, and Israeli commandos commandeered the ship and executed, I think, 8 people, including an American citizen. And the propaganda video that they put out there for Western media audiences was showing people on board trying to fend off Israeli soldiers with like chairs and tables, and they were circling them saying like, these are weapons, justifying the fact that they just opened fire on all these peaceful activists on board the ship. And that's what I was just like, this is deeply sick. This is deeply sick. And 2 years later, when I was at Russia Today doing my show, I had a Palestinian producer who was working on the show. And during Operation Protective Edge, she had to stop working and check in with her family to see if they were alive. And it was a very big wake-up call to me, because I just thought, how is this happening? How is no one speaking up about this? And then it just got worse. It just keeps getting worse. But it's been a long road. I mean, for 10 years of just trying to yell from the rooftops, this is happening, you know, and it just seems like it's taken so long for people to really see Israel for what it is. But I would say that's the origin of my awakening. And I've just been learning more and more ever since.
Thank you. Yes, that propaganda machine, it's curated to just a meticulous level and wretched. It's really disgusting. I'll take one from the questions here. Thank you for this important film. I know you're aware of the repression of student activists organizing in support of Palestine on university campuses. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom for students facing disciplinary actions from the university for their actions in support of Palestine?
Man, I feel like you guys would be better to speak on this because you are, you know, you're at universities. I mean, it's absolutely heinous during this genocide for think piece after think piece. It's like the New York Times and all these papers of record, all they can do is talk about anti-Semitism at Harvard and students' feelings being upset at Palestine protests on campus. I mean, what about the people who are being murdered? What about your colleagues? What about the academic institutions that are being demolished? Like, what is wrong with you people? I mean, journalists, 105 journalists being killed, their entire families. I mean, Israeli soldiers on camera filming themselves with unending depravity, war crimes. This whole crackdown on BDS and pro-Palestine speech. Look, I sued the state of Georgia back a couple of years ago over their anti-BDS law. And I won the case. And I was one of many plaintiffs across the country who did win, because there are these insane pro-Israel loyalty oaths that exist in more than half the states. And at that time, I was already sounding the alarm. Like, look, we like to drone on and on and on about free speech on college campuses and how, oh, conservatives can't speak because pink-haired college students heckle them. It's like, no, pro-Palestine speech is the most police speech in the world. Look at Germany, look at France, look at college campuses here in the US. So my advice is to stay strong and stay true, because you are on the right side of history, and we cannot let these institutions of power silence us. We can't let them silence our voices, because we are right and we are just. And the Palestinians need us to speak out loud and proud and unapologetically. And I know it's scary, and I know it's so hard, and it must be so hard to be a student with your whole life ahead of you and your whole career ahead of you, and to have those prospects be potentially crushed under some false allegation of anti-Semitism. There must be nothing scarier than that. as someone who's getting into this, but I beg of you, stay strong, because you will win and we will beat them back. And it's changing already. They're not able to maintain this. And I truly believe that once this is all over, and pray that that is soon rather than later, I think that we will see the fall of a lot of this censorship. I think that we will see, you know, a big movement that we can push back on these things. And I do think that these people will be rewarded at the end of the day and find positions that they will be comfortable being in. Because let's just be clear, like if you're a law student and you're being threatened by Harvard Law or whatever, saying like you're not going to get a job in these institutions, do you really want to work in an institution that is going to tell you that you cannot speak out against something like this? So my advice, yes, it's very scary and hard, but we have to stand on the right side and we have to keep speaking truth to power, because it's never going to be popular, right? The institutions never ceded to civil rights until we made them. The police and the political establishment never ceded to any of these movements. We were still supporting, we, meaning the US government, was still supporting South African apartheid until the world isolated South Africa. So they're never going to just, the colonial powers are never just going to do the right thing until they are forced to do the right thing. So stay strong, stay true. I can't even imagine, honestly, because as a journalist, I paved my own career, but I can't even imagine being a journalism student and wanting to get into a serious career and know that you essentially have to sell your soul. You can't speak up about these things. You have to just essentially be a willing agent of empire and believe in these myths. And I just don't think that young people are there anymore. We look at polling, you look at the sentiment of young people, we're about to see a huge schism and a collapse of this kind of old guard and old way of thinking. And I think that Gen Z is going to come out on top and change the way that this country operates.
Thank you so much for that. I know I will be sharing that with my my students who are facing this, and some of my colleagues' students as well in the CSU system. They need all the support they can get, and I definitely want to prop up some of the stuff you were saying there. Right, keep protesting. You're on the right side of history. We have your back. Right, free Palestine, and yell it through bullhorns, even when they try to get you on that.
From the river to the sea.
That's right. That's right. And I would also add, don't waste your time arguing with Zionists. This comes from someone specifically who works in the area of argumentation, and I find myself arguing for my profession often, and I will tell you, it is not worth it. It is not worth your time. It is not worth your energy. And just stay strong in the face of all this. With that, actually, I have another question here. At this point, as I was just saying, many of us have come to the conclusion that attempting to persuade a Zionist is a fool's errand, that it's not just impotent, but counterproductive to our cause. Unfortunately, there are still some people who believe that engaging in discourse with Zionists is productive and even the only legitimate course of action during a time of, quote, heightened tensions. This has been reflected, for instance, as we were just talking about, in university administration's messaging to campus communities, where they center the interpersonal. They talk about coming together to condemn hate and violence of all forms, rather than the root causes like occupation, apartheid, genocide, colonialism, and imperialism. Should we engage with people like this? That is, people who believe that we should engage with Zionists. If so, how might we plant seeds to help them understand why their energy is better spent elsewhere?
Yeah, John, I couldn't agree with you more. Look, before I did waste a lot of time, I have to say, because trolls are trolls for that reason, to suck your energy. They're psychic vampires for that purpose. And especially the concern trolling is what kills me the most. People who are like, oh, I used to like your work until you did this. And then it, like, you know, it's like all just designed to draw you in. Block and move on. I cannot emphasize that enough. Block and move on. And that's just online. Do not engage with any trolls online. But look, we're also talking about real life, and we're talking about friends and families and colleagues and a lot of people who are surrounded by Zionists. And I would say that, yes, it is worth it but you have to read the room. Is the Zionist that you're trying to convince someone who is confused, or are they racist? I mean, look, your racist uncle at Thanksgiving who hates immigrants, yeah, you're not going to get really far trying to garner their empathy and humanity about why racism is okay, like why it's not okay to hate Mexican and Black people. I think that, look, if you have like liberals who are just on the wrong side because they are confused because of how overly complicated and obfuscated this issue has become, intentionally so, in the Western media, that is absolutely worth it. And I think showing films like this, I've even talked to Israelis who have watched this and they say my view is completely altered forever. Because unlike even this latest onslaught, because October 7th muddies the waters, and again, they claim that they're just fighting Hamas and this and that. But once you watch this documentary and you just say there's no question, right, that these people were systematically targeted, children, that Israeli snipers put children in the crosshairs and pulled the trigger over and over and over again. And the myths just do not hold up. And I think that it's just about seeing that other side that they've never been shown. And so it's really reading and feeling out one by one the Zionists that you know. I think that's how we're going to change hearts and minds. Sit down, you know, have a cup of coffee, talk about these issues with them if you feel like they can be moved. And I think that's entirely up to every one of us, the people in our lives that we feel like are unmovable. And I mean, honestly, at this point, I've purged everyone that is supporting this. I mean, not that I really had peripherally like people, friends that were bigots, but I mean, at this point, it's like, look, you can't pose as a liberal anymore. You cannot pose as a progressive if you are supporting this in any way, shape, or form. And if you are blinded by the truth, if after you talk to them and they still are adamant about supporting Israel, it might be, you know, it might not be worth it to proceed. But I would say that our best bet is not the staunch Zionists, but the people who can be moved. And there's plenty of people who can be moved because Israel's entire colonial project depends on people like Noah Tishby. They send out their liaisons who speak to American audiences because they depend on us. Israeli society is totally fascist. I mean, they're not out there talking about human shields and stuff like that. No, they want to expel and ethnically cleanse all Palestinians. And it's only Americans who are confused about this because they design their propaganda for us because they need our aid and our weapons. And so we're really the last leg who's maintaining this. And it's disgusting. So it's about damn time that we wake up to what's going on.
Again, well put. I think we got time for maybe one or two more here. Do you know if South Africa is including these past genocidal strategies, which your documentary is illustrating in their new application to The Hague, suing Israel for genocide?
So I just did an interview with Sam Husseini, who's spoken to Francis Boyle, who won an ICJ lawsuit in the past over Yugoslavia, if I'm not mistaken. So he knows quite a bit about this court. And so I would recommend people to listen to the podcast because I was surprised to learn that no, it's not including past things like the Great March of Return, even though it should. It's just maintained in the current situation. And unfortunately, there are times where it's unclear if it actually is saying, you know, there should be a ceasefire, if it's just saying stop the genocidal military campaign. So I think all of that remains to be seen. But I do know that the collective punishment is included, which obviously started before October 7th. So the siege, obviously, which turned into a complete siege, that is absolutely included. And if I'm not mistaken, I think previous statements from Israeli officials, because there was leaked cabinet memos that talked about the plan that predated October 7th of ethnically cleansing all of Gaza. And so this colonization plan was already being passed around in the Knesset. This was obviously just a reason to carry this out. So if I'm not mistaken, I think that the court is bringing that up because that, again, points to the premeditated nature of the genocide, as well as all the genocidal intent, which is usually one of the hardest things to prove in genocidal cases and in cases of genocide. And this absolutely is not the case in this regard. They are naked about their genocidal intent. There's dozens of examples. In fact, there's like 5 or 6 pages just within the briefing, and dozens more since.
Thank you, Abby. I think that will be our time. I want to respect your time here. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful chatting here with you and asking these questions. We will keep up the good fight. And is there any closing words you might want to give here?
Just keep it up, you guys. I know it's so demoralizing and so hard and so depressing to see humanity fail us so much, but we have to keep fighting. I feel like there is kind of an emotional plateau, understandably so, but we have to just remember our brothers and sisters. Our hearts are in Palestine, and we have to keep fighting for our friends, because this is, history will judge us all, and we'll ask, what did we all do? And I have to be proud of that. When I look back at my life, I have to say I did everything that I could. And I know that we all feel that way. And I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Keep up the great work. It must be very tough on college campuses, especially, to be pursuing this. And I just have the utmost respect for all of you for doing things like this. Thanks so much for the time.
Hey, Danny.
Yes, just to answer one of the questions, thank you again, Abby, for this wonderful, inspiring, really film and discussion afterward. And thank you, John, for doing also the discussion and moderating. One of the questions was, will we have it recorded? Yes, this event, this whole thing has been recorded, and I put it on the chat room. So if you go back to Cal State's, our center's website, which is CSUSB.edu/CSMAW, stands for the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab World. If you go there, we'll have a link to the recording once it's get digitized, and then we'll have a link to it. So it will be available for everybody. And maybe just a word of hope. Thank you so much, Abby, again. Probably one of the most inspiring thing is when there was a brief time when the Rafah border was opened, there were more people who went back into Gaza than those who fled out of Gaza. And that shows the determination, the love, the passion, the commitment, and hopefully the hope of a free Palestine and a free Gaza once and for all, for every person, because these people are so connected to the land, and we're all connected with them emotionally. And in any type of effort, we can all collectively, as human, as a free world. Free world means those who are free, who love freedom. This is what I mean about. We will go back, and then we will enjoy one day a free Gaza and a free Palestine, because they deserve it, and we owe it to ourselves before we owe it to the Palestinians to fight the good fight.
Free Palestine, my brother.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. You rock.
Can you stay for a minute for?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you might want to just tell people that they can watch the film in case it was too skippy for them. And was it skippy for you guys?
Yeah, and let me put the link. So everyone who's
Okay, from
still
me.
on the panel, we actually, you can view it online for free. Thank you for making it available for everyone. Abby, we really appreciate it.
We just need to stop the recording. Would you
Yeah,
kindly
that's
stop
thing. Oh,